Jonathan Kessler had always been a magnet for minor disasters, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of Liara. She stood near the observation window of Erythra Prime, her long, iridescent ears twitching slightly as she studied the stars outside. The faint glow along the edges of her ears caught the station's ambient light, making her look less like an alien diplomat and more like some cosmic fashion model auditioning for a zero-gravity photo shoot. Jonathan tried to appear calm, though the fact that his drink hovered out of its glass due to a misaligned gravity field did nothing to help. "Careful," Liara said, her voice melodic but edged with amusement. "Humans and anti-gravity drinks usually don't mix well." She extended a hand in greeting, and Jonathan noticed the tiny metallic rings threaded through the upper part of her ears, each reflecting the light in miniature rainbows. He shook her hand and immediately spilled half of his drink onto the polished metal floor. "I meant to do that," he said, awkward grin plastered across his face. Liara's laugh was soft, contagious, and somehow made his ears warm despite the station's controlled climate. "Do you always introduce yourself with a flood?" she asked, tilting her head, the long ears brushing her shoulders like delicate antennae. "No," Jonathan admitted, trying to dab at the mess with a napkin that was floating away. "Usually, it's just minor explosions or accidentally insulting the host." He watched as a small maintenance drone zipped by, bumping gently into a floating tray of hors d'oeuvres. Liara's ears twitched again, and she caught the tray effortlessly. "Impressive reflexes," he said. "Or telepathy?" "Neither," she replied, placing the tray back on the table. "Just years of practice watching humans stumble around." She smirked, and Jonathan felt both insulted and oddly charmed. "Besides, I'm curious about you. Most humans don't survive the first 10 minutes in a formal alien gathering without fainting, spilling something, or accidentally launching a drone into someone's lap." Jonathan laughed nervously. "I guess I'm special." He made a small bow and gestured toward the galaxy outside. "Do all your people have ears like that?" Liara's ears twitched again, and she leaned closer. "Some do. Some don't. My ears are a little more sensitive to emotional vibrations. Yours are amusingly predictable." She raised an eyebrow, or the alien equivalent of one, and Jonathan felt like she could see straight through him, though her gaze was warm rather than intimidating. The evening continued with an awkward rhythm, Jonathan trying to keep up with complex etiquette, Liara quietly correcting him with a teasing glance, and minor disasters following him like a loyal, invisible pet. A hovering waiter attempted to deliver a tray of sparkling drinks, and Jonathan managed to bump into it, sending one drink spinning through zero gravity and narrowly missing the ambassador from Trelix 9. Liara simply reached out, plucked the drink from mid-air, and handed it back with a grin. "You humans really are clumsy," she said. "But entertaining." Her ears twitched at a subtle vibration coming from across the room, and Jonathan, still dizzy from the near disaster, followed her gaze. Several shadowy figures lingered near the balcony, watching them with a seriousness that contrasted sharply with the frivolity of the reception. "Should we be concerned?" he asked, swallowing the lump in his throat. Liara waved a dismissive hand, though her ears flicked like delicate flags. "Probably. But let's enjoy the evening anyway. There's no point panicking before the danger finds us." Jonathan laughed. "Easy for you to say. You have ears that warn you." "True," she replied, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Though I think I enjoy watching you stumble more than the warning." By the time the reception ended, Jonathan had spilled drinks, tripped over floating furniture, and accidentally insulted a minor senator from an obscure planetary system, but he had also earned a smile, a laugh, and a lingering gaze from Liara that made the chaos feel worth it. When she finally allowed him to escort her to her quarters, her ears brushed his shoulder in a gesture that was somehow intimate, teasing, and reassuring all at once. "Tomorrow," she said as the doors slid closed, "you'll learn why some humans shouldn't survive 10 minutes at a formal gathering." "I'm counting on it," Jonathan replied, still grinning despite the bruised ego and minor burns from a misfired plasma candle earlier. That night, as he floated in his quarters aboard Erythra Prime, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about Liara, the way her ears twitched, the way she laughed, and the quiet spark of mischief in her eyes. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that whatever came next, the universe had just handed him a complication he couldn't possibly have prepared for, falling in love with an alien woman whose people might very well want him dead. But for now, he laughed at his own clumsiness, and he let himself float in anticipation of the chaos, adventure, and laughter that he was sure Liara would bring into his life. The morning aboard Erythra Prime began with Jonathan waking to the gentle hum of the station's life support system, and the distinct sensation of floating, because, of course, he had forgotten to secure himself in the anti-gravity bed. Liara was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her long ears curled around her shoulders like luminescent ribbons, watching him with a mixture of amusement and mild disbelief. "Good morning, human," she said, her voice teasing. "Did you enjoy floating face first into your coffee again?" Jonathan groaned, reaching for the cup that had somehow drifted halfway across the room. "I call it, avant-garde caffeine delivery." He tried to sit up, misjudged the anti-gravity controls, and ended up spinning slowly in place like a confused satellite. Liara giggled, reaching out to gently stabilize him. Her ears twitched faintly, glowing brighter at his display of zero-gravity incompetence. "Perhaps," she said, "you should let someone with opposable ears show you how it's done." Jonathan rolled his eyes but grinned. "I think your species may be overestimating opposable ears." The morning passed with a series of minor calamities that Jonathan insisted on calling team-building exercises. Liara guided him through the station's corridors, where gravity shifts were a feature rather than a bug, and every wrong step risked a spectacular, slow-motion collision with floating furniture or unsuspecting diplomats. He learned quickly that Liara's ears were more than decorative. They seemed to detect danger, emotion, and occasionally, misplaced confidence. When Jonathan attempted to hold a breakfast tray, Liara's ears twitched, and a startled laugh escaped her as the tray pivoted in zero gravity, narrowly missing an alien delegate from a planet known for taking offense to spilled liquids. By mid-morning, Jonathan was starting to feel like he might survive his first full day without catastrophic embarrassment, until Liara suggested a casual stroll through the orbital gardens. The gardens were a marvel of alien engineering, plants that glowed softly in artificial starlight, flowers that hummed in resonant frequencies, and floating bioluminescent insects that occasionally collided with visitors. Jonathan stepped carefully, and promptly tripped on a floating root. Liara caught him with one hand, her other hand brushing against a particularly melodic flower. "You humans are adorable when you stumble," she said. "Though your coordination, or lack thereof, is alarming." Jonathan laughed, brushing himself off. "I prefer to think of it as strategic comedy." The humor of the day did little to dispel the subtle unease Jonathan had begun to feel. Liara's ears twitched sharply whenever they passed certain restricted corridors, and she glanced nervously at the shadows between the columns of light. Jonathan followed her gaze, noting for the first time that some of the station's more enigmatic figures were watching them, figures who moved like whispers, blending with the architecture, eyes glinting with quiet intent. "Are they watching us?" he asked. Liara tilted her head, long ears brushing against her shoulders. "Yes. But probably not for a party invitation. Just casual surveillance. You'll get used to it." Jonathan made a face. "I think I prefer exploding coffee cups to being watched by mysterious shadows." The afternoon brought an official introduction to her people, well, most of them. Liara's family and political associates were gathered in a vast hall, the walls shimmering with panels displaying constellations from their home world. The humor came quickly. Jonathan mispronounced alien titles, accidentally set off a low-grade anti-gravity field that sent a ceremonial cloak floating like a small moon, and tried to shake hands with a delegate who only understood telepathic greetings. Liara's ears twitched in amusement, catching subtle reactions from the room. "You're surviving," she whispered, leaning close. "Though just barely." Jonathan gave her a mock salute. Survival is my middle name. Well, not literally, but it should be. By evening, Jonathan and Liara found themselves alone in a quieter section of the station. Floating lights cast gentle shadows, and the view of the swirling nebula outside reminded him that despite the chaos, this moment was theirs. Liara's ears twitched in thought, and Jonathan couldn't help but reach out, letting one hand brush the side of her neck where the luminous streak of her ear rested. You know, she said softly, some of my people will not approve of us. Jonathan swallowed, trying to mask his rising concern with humor. I'd like to meet these disapproving people. Maybe offer them some zero-gravity coffee. Liara's laughter, soft and melodic, filled the quiet space. I doubt caffeine will change their minds, but your enthusiasm is entertaining. Jonathan smiled, floating closer. Then I'll just have to be entertaining until they decide I'm not worth killing. Her ears twitched gently against his shoulder, and for a moment, the tension eased. In the vastness of the orbital station, surrounded by alien elegance, danger, and humor, they discovered a fragile rhythm. Jonathan's clumsy charm and Liara's measured grace, spinning together through gravity fields, political intrigue, and the subtle pulse of a galaxy that seemed determined to test them at every turn. As they gazed at the stars, Jonathan realized that marrying an alien woman, especially one with extraordinary ears and an even more extraordinary sense of humor, was going to be far more complicated, and far more delightful, than anything he had ever imagined. Jonathan was attempting what could only be described as human acrobatics in zero gravity, when the first attack came. One moment he was reaching for a floating datapad, the next he was tumbling through the station corridor as a sleek, black drone zipped past, scanning him with red sensors. Liara's ears flicked sharply, alerting her before he even realized danger existed. Jonathan, she called, grabbing his arm mid-spin and sending them both careening into the nearest anti-gravity rail. Try not to die before breakfast. He blinked, adrenaline pumping, and muttered, I was just testing the station's structural integrity. A trio of shadowy figures appeared around the corner, moving with the precision of trained assassins, or perhaps just extremely aggressive accountants. Jonathan tried to look heroic and failed spectacularly, spinning in midair as his foot collided with a floating holopanel. Liara's long ears glowed faintly, a warning signal, and she grabbed a nearby comm device. Clippy 2.0, she said, activate evasive maneuvers. Now. A small holographic drone zipped into the corridor, projecting a series of walls and force fields that made Jonathan collide repeatedly, grumbling about the cruel physics of alien technology. Liara, however, moved like a dancer in zero gravity, her ears swishing to maintain balance, deftly kicking one attacker into a wall panel while narrowly avoiding another. Try not to trip this time, she said, not unkindly, as she flipped gracefully over his spinning form. Jonathan gave her a sheepish grin. I'm more theatrical than practical. They scrambled toward a maintenance hatch that led to the lower sectors of the station. Jonathan's clumsiness caused him to accidentally set off a small magnetic pulse, sending a bucket of floating tools spinning like mini-satellites. One of the attackers reached for them, only to have a wrench bounce off their helmet. Liara laughed, a melodic sound that cut through the chaos, as she guided Jonathan through narrow conduits with uncanny precision. Once in the lower sectors, they found a rogue freighter docked for repairs, a quirky little ship named the Nebula Nut, manned by an AI called Gizmo. Gizmo's voice crackled through the comms. Welcome aboard. Humans are messy. Aliens are flashy. You two are catastrophic, the AI said. Do you want a manual? Yes, please, Jonathan muttered. Preferably one that comes with less imminent death. Liara rolled her eyes, though her ears twitched in amusement. Don't get attached to anything fragile, she said. Especially him. Inside the freighter, Gizmo guided them through a maze of control panels, engine cores, and oddly shaped storage compartments. Jonathan tried to help, pressing buttons at random, inadvertently opening a compartment filled with floating, squeaking snack creatures. One latched onto his sleeve, prompting him to spin wildly while Liara caught him mid-tumble, her ears brushing against his shoulder in the process. "Snack creature secured," she said, smirking. "You're improving, in a disaster sort of way." Outside the freighter, orbital alarms blared as the attackers pursued. Jonathan peeked at the viewport and saw a small squadron of sleek ships navigating the station's rings. Liara leaned close, her ears bristling with tension, though her tone remained teasing. "Do you always get chased by assassins on your first week with someone?" Jonathan asked, gripping the console for balance. "Not usually," she said, glancing at him. "Mostly just minor threats. Exploding coffee cups, misplaced gravity fields, that sort of thing." "You're exceptional." Gizmo hummed and a corridor opened, directing them into an escape chute. Jonathan jumped, narrowly avoiding a spark of exposed circuitry, and shot forward with surprising velocity. Liara followed, ears streaming behind her like a comet's tail. The attackers tried to follow, but Gizmo activated a defensive field, knocking them off course. Jonathan stumbled into the freighter's cockpit, nearly toppling a control panel. "I think we lost them," he exclaimed, wiping sweat from his brow. Liara, floating nearby, smirked. "Barely. But congratulations on surviving this part without total annihilation." Gizmo's lights blinked in agreement. "You're lucky you're entertaining. That's the only reason you're alive." Jonathan flopped into the co-pilot's seat. "Next time, maybe we can have a quiet dinner instead of life-threatening chases." Liara's laugh filled the cabin. "Quiet dinners are overrated. Danger keeps things interesting. And besides, you're finally starting to grasp what it means to survive with me." He groaned. "I think I need a manual, preferably one with pictures, and maybe hazard warnings in bold." "You'll get used to it," she said, leaning back with a grin. Her ears twitched, scanning the shadows outside the viewport, as if already anticipating the next threat. "Or at least, I hope you do." Jonathan, floating in the cockpit of a rogue freighter, surrounded by blinking lights, zero-gravity snack creatures, and an AI with a sarcastic personality, realized something crucial: surviving Liara's world required speed, wit, and an endless capacity for chaos. But more than that, it required laughter. And, apparently, a strong stomach for high-speed chases and exploding wrenches. As the freighter pulled away from the station, Jonathan looked at Liara, whose long ears glimmered in the ambient glow of the nebula outside. She caught his gaze and winked, a gesture both playful and dangerous. "Next stop," she said, "we figure out who really wants you dead. And then, maybe, I can teach you how to look graceful while running for your life." Jonathan groaned and laughed simultaneously. "Graceful, yes, that's exactly what I'm known for." Jonathan sat stiffly in the council chamber of Liara's people, trying to look dignified while floating slightly above the floor due to an overzealous anti-gravity field. Liara leaned beside him, her long ears brushing against the polished panels, twitching subtly as they scanned the room. Around them, alien delegates murmured in low tones, their eyes glinting with suspicion and barely contained amusement. "Remember," Liara whispered, "this isn't a battlefield. It's politics. But the stakes are just as deadly." Jonathan swallowed. "Right. Politics. Definitely less dangerous than plasma blasters and drones." Liara's lips twitched in the faintest smile. "Mostly." The head delegate, an elegant figure with a translucent exoskeleton and 6 delicate fingers, regarded Jonathan with what could almost be called curiosity. "You are the human who married Liara," the delegate said, voice like liquid crystal. "You enter our council uninvited by tradition, yet bold in action." Jonathan bowed hastily, knocking over a floating cup. Liara's ears twitched with amusement as he scrambled to catch it. "Uninvited," he repeated, "but with the best intentions." "Mostly." The council erupted in low laughter, and Jonathan realized humor might be the only shield he had. He attempted a self-deprecating grin. "I promise not to dismantle anything important." Except perhaps my own dignity. Liara covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Her ears twitched, catching subtle reactions from the delegates, tiny flickers of agreement or amusement that humans rarely notice. Your species, the head delegate continued, is unpredictable. And yet, Liara seems unafraid to vouch for you. Mostly, Liara interjected. I'm slightly unafraid. She gave Jonathan a pointed look. And you're mostly entertaining. Jonathan nodded solemnly. Mostly entertaining is my goal. The council presented Jonathan with a series of challenges, tests of understanding alien protocols, interpreting complex hieroglyphic communication panels, and navigating a holographic maze that simulated political intrigue. Every mistake Jonathan made was met with gentle laughter rather than scorn, often because his failures were spectacularly theatrical. At one point, he accidentally triggered a holographic fireworks display, and Liara's ears twitched so brightly the delegates gasped in surprise. You humans are entertainingly reckless, one delegate said, though there was warmth in the observation. Reckless, yes, Jonathan admitted, ducking to avoid a holographic flaming comet. But in a charming way, I hope. As the day progressed, Jonathan's attempts at diplomacy became increasingly improvisational. He misread a gesture, causing a minor floating object to collide with a delegate's ceremonial robe. Liara's ears twitched, a subtle signal of both disapproval and amusement. Jonathan scrambled to apologize while Liara intervened, translating his clumsy gestures into words that sounded both diplomatic and witty. By mid-afternoon, Jonathan had begun to grasp the intricacies of alien political humor, a combination of literal interpretation, careful exaggeration, and just enough chaos to keep things interesting. Liara's ears twitched constantly, guiding him through the subtleties of lies, half-truths, and hidden agendas. He realized that the Council's dangerous games were often more about patience and perception than actual violence. During a recess, Liara and Jonathan floated through the station's internal garden, where plants hummed softly and bioluminescent insects traced lazy circles around them. Jonathan, exhausted but exhilarated, asked, "Do you think they'll ever like me?" Liara laughed, ears flicking playfully. They might. They already find you amusing, which is the first step. The second step is surviving their questions without accidentally setting anything on fire. Jonathan winced. Fire is a recurring problem in my life. I'll try to be more diplomatic about it. Even as humor softened the tension, subtle signs of danger persisted. Liara's ears twitched sharply when a shadowy figure lingered near a council entryway, and Jonathan realized that not all opposition was friendly. They returned to the chamber, where negotiations continued with a mixture of laughter, tense pauses, and Jonathan's unique brand of human unpredictability. By the end of the session, the council had tentatively accepted Jonathan's presence. Some delegates smiled behind carefully folded appendages, others raised eyebrows in amusement, and one even floated a small holographic snack toward him in quiet acknowledgement. Liara's ears twitched in quiet satisfaction, and she leaned close to whisper, "See? Surviving politics can be fun." Jonathan grinned, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Fun is my specialty. Especially when combined with near-death experiences. Liara laughed softly. You're learning, in your own chaotic way. As they floated toward the council exit, Jonathan looked at the swirling nebula outside and realized that surviving Liara's people would require courage, wit, and humor. But more importantly, he had to trust the rhythm of her ears, the precision of her guidance, and his own uniquely human knack for disaster. Together, they were beginning to navigate a galaxy full of politics, intrigue, and subtle danger. One laugh, one twitching ear, and one improbable maneuver at a time. Jonathan floated nervously beside Liara on the bridge of the nebula nut, staring at the holomap displaying the council's secret faction plotting against them. Gizmo's voice crackled through the speakers. Alert, they're attempting a coup, employing suborbital interceptors and a herd of bureaucratic drones. Recommendation, survive, entertain, and don't spill anything critical. Jonathan rubbed his temples. Entertain. Why is entertaining always a requirement for survival? Liara smirked, ears flicking sharply. Because humor disarms enemies, and keeps you from panicking like a human in zero gravity. Jonathan's eyes widened as several sleek ships emerged from the nebula, moving in formation. Liara grabbed his hand, her grip firm, her ears twirling in excitement rather than fear. Time to prove your worth, she said, floating toward the control console with ease. The freighter surged forward, evading laser fire with a combination of nimble maneuvers and Gizmo's sarcastic guidance. Jonathan, trying to be helpful, accidentally activated the snack compartment, and a dozen squeaking creatures shot into the corridor. Liara's ears twitched with amusement as Jonathan frantically corralled the airborne pets while simultaneously trying to pull up the shields. You humans are inefficient, yet adorable, she said over the comm, and you survive by luck and charm. Both of which are useful now. Jonathan gritted his teeth, ducking a laser blast. Luck, charm, and apparently chaos. The enemy faction attempted to board the freighter using magnetic grappling lines. Jonathan, flailing spectacularly, knocked several of them into each other and the wall panels. Liara's long ears emitted a subtle glow, alerting him to weak points in their armor. Together, they created an improvised defense, combining human improvisation and alien intuition. By the time they reached the council chamber where the conspirators had gathered, Jonathan was panting, clothes disheveled, but alive. Liara's ears twitched like antennae, signaling the conspirators' deception as they presented falsified claims. Jonathan stepped forward, awkwardly theatrical, hands raised. Ladies, gentlemen, and six-fingered dignitaries, he said, voice cracking. I present evidence you didn't see coming, and maybe don't fully understand. Hollow projections of intercepted communications and misappropriated resources flashed before the council. Gizmo added sarcastic annotations, which Liara translated with a flourish. The conspirators sputtered, arguing and tripping over themselves in their panic. Jonathan tried to bow gracefully mid-chaos, colliding with a floating pedestal. Liara's laughter rang clear. Human, your disaster is working, she whispered. By the time the dust settled, the rogue faction was exposed. Several delegates, previously skeptical, applauded Jonathan's unique contribution. Liara's ears twitched with satisfaction, and she leaned closer, whispering, see? Sometimes being unpredictable is exactly what's needed. Jonathan exhaled, exhausted but triumphant. I feel alive. And terrifyingly lucky. The council formally recognized their union, granting Jonathan protection and acknowledging the bond between human and alien. Liara's family offered genuine congratulations, some even shaking his hand, which caused Jonathan to wobble slightly in zero gravity. Later, alone in the station's observation dome, Jonathan looked at the swirling nebula, the stars reflecting in his eyes. Liara floated beside him, her ears brushing his shoulder. You've changed, she said softly. You've learned patience, creativity, and, surprisingly, diplomacy. Jonathan laughed. And I've learned not to spill anything on your people. Mostly. Liara nudged him playfully. Mostly is a start. Jonathan glanced at her, then out at the stars. I came here thinking I'd survive alien politics. Instead, I've discovered something better. Surviving with you is worth every misstep, every chase, every chaos-filled moment. Liara's ears twitched in affection. And I've discovered that even the most unpredictable humans have courage, and humor that makes survival almost enjoyable. Jonathan smiled, feeling the weight of the journey behind him and the promise of what lay ahead. He realized he was no longer just a clumsy human out of place, he was a partner, trusted, and accepted in a world far larger and stranger than he'd ever imagined. As the freighter drifted in orbit, stars swirling around them, Jonathan and Liara held hands, laughter mingling with the hum of the station. Chaos still lurked in the galaxy, but for the first time, Jonathan understood that love, courage, and humor could turn even the most dangerous universe into a place worth navigating, together. The journey had changed him, and now, with Liara by his side, He was ready for whatever the stars might throw at them next.